Stargazing scientists at NASA are confident that within the next few decades, humans will discover the very first signs of extraterrestrial life. Yet some believe it's entirely possible alien craft have already visited Earth.
Large black flying object. Hey, calm down, calm down.
But extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. In this series, I'm going to investigate some of the most remarkable and recent UFO sightings from around the world. They saw something really strange in the sky that day. And I'll be joined by renowned astrophysicist and space journalist, Sarah Crudders.
The thing is, with something so extraordinary like this, we've got to look at all the more logical explanations. I still think this can be explained by science.
As together, we'll separate fact from fiction once and for all. That is an unidentified flying object.
I knew you were going to say that, and yes, it is. It's one of the greatest UFO mysteries of all time.
From our specially created UFO investigation hub, we'll speak to experts.
We have no conventional explanation for what we are seeing here.
Whistleblowers.
Anytime you step out of ranks in an organization like mine, there's obviously going to be some repercussions.
And first-hand witnesses.
There was this massive boomerang. It's at least 1 mile to 1.5 miles wide. It was huge.
Wow, that's just spooked me now. And finally answer the big question. Are we alone in the universe? Whatever they are, they're not of this world. Humans have been describing UFO encounters for generations, with depictions of disc-like objects going back thousands of years. But it wasn't until July 1947 and the famous Roswell sighting in New Mexico that disc-like objects or flying saucers captured the public imagination. Conspiracy theories ran riot after it was reported that a UFO had crashed on a ranch. Initially, the US military even publicly admitted they'd recovered a disc.
I am here to discuss the so-called flying saucer.
But they backtracked the next day, insisting instead on the more down-to-earth explanation of a weather balloon. Rumors of alien bodies and a government cover-up swirled for decades.
The Air Force has been accused from time to time of hiding information about UFO. What do you have to say to that kind of thing?
Those charges are absolutely untrue.
There's nothing to hide.
There's nothing to hide at all.
And despite US authorities' best efforts to put the rumors to bed,
just no indication at all of any kind of incident at Roswell. We can't find an advantage to keeping such a thing a secret. We think that probably what happened is that there wasn't anything significant.
Roswell and the image of the flying saucer remains in the public consciousness today.
Although people see a number of different shapes, people still have in their mind's eye this image of the archetypal flying saucer, the disc-shaped craft.
In a recent example, an online video from October 2020 allegedly shows a round object having landed on a mountain in Mexico. But one of the most notorious disc-shaped sightings in modern history happened alarmingly above one of America's biggest airports.
37596, contact departure 118.27.
It was 2006 and a crisp autumn afternoon at one of America's busiest airports, Chicago O'Hare International. November the 7th was a day like any other, until about 4:30 p.m. when a United Airlines employee on the tarmac noticed something strange above gate C-17. Scores of witnesses described a similar thing, a silent craft directly above the airport. And the calls kept coming in thick and fast, with conversations between airport staff and the air traffic control tower recorded in real time.
Tower, this is Dan.
Hey, Dave, it's Super from the air tower. Hey, did you see a flying disc out by C-17?
Oh, it starts soon. You're seeing flying discs.
The news broke soon afterward. The Federal Aviation Administration declared it to be a weather phenomenon. But we're going to investigate the events of November the 7th, 2006, and get to the bottom of the mystery once and for all. I'm excited about this one, Sarah. This is a mass sighting.
It's Chicago O'Hare Airport. A hugely busy airport. People are looking to the skies all the time. You've got plane watchers around, and multiple people called in a sighting of a UFO, an unexplained stationary object in this case, and it was seen for just 5 minutes before it disappeared.
How come there are no photographs of this?
Well, this is interesting because this was 2006, this happening, so people didn't really have camera phones in the same way we do today.
When you're in airports, you generally got a camera with you because you're going somewhere.
That is true, that is true.
Do you think that people did photograph this, did video it, and that video has been suppressed?
That's an interesting thought. We haven't got any photographic evidence, but credible witnesses called in this unusual sighting to the control tower.
Let's hear it.
Tower, this is Dave.
Hey, Dave, it's Sue from United Tower. Hey, did you see a flying disc out by C-17?
Oh, don't even start, Sue.
No, I'm serious.
You're seeing flying discs.
Well, look at the pilot and the ramp guys are telling us the C-17, they saw some flying disc above, and we can't see it.
Come on, Sue.
You didn't see it, right?
You guys been celebrating the holidays or anything, or what? You having a Christmas party today? I haven't mentioned anything, Sue. And if I did, I wouldn't admit to it. No, I have not seen any flying disc at Gate C-7. Unless you got a new aircraft you're bringing out today that we don't know about. No, I have not seen anything, Sue.
Well, it seems like a very light-hearted call. I mean, the guy in the control tower is saying that he can't see anything, and the girl phoning it in, she hasn't seen it, she's just been told about it.
Yeah, but how would you feel if you're in that job, a very serious job as well, if you're guiding aircraft into and out of an airport, and then someone rings up and tells you about a UFO? You wouldn't take it seriously, would you?
No. So, with no video evidence, no photographic evidence, only the audio, how do we progress with this investigation?
Multiple people at the airport said they saw something they can't explain, but only one person came forward, and he spoke to Robert Powell, who is an executive board member for the Scientific Coalition of UAP Studies.
Okay, what's UAP Studies, Sarah?
UAP stands for Unidentified Aerial Phenomena. It tries to get away from the term UFO, which can sometimes be downplayed and overused.
Okay, you're going to try and help us get to the bottom of what happened at O'Hare Airport, and it sounds as though it was quite an event.
Yes, I consider it one of the more interesting events in the history of the phenomenon.
What exactly happened? Can you talk us through it?
The guys that were moving suitcases into the plane looked up, and they saw this spherical object hovering above the ground. There were probably several dozen people that saw this object, and there were at least 8 who have actually reported the object. Because that's a safety concern.
This is Sue from United.
Yes?
There was a disc out there flying around, so if you guys see it out there...
A disc? How high above Charlie 17?
Well, it was above our tower. So, if you happen to see anything...
You know what, I'll keep a peeled eye for that.
All right.
It was just stationary, not moving at all. Their best guess was it was 20 to 80 feet in size. It was disc-shaped, but if you looked at it directly from above, all you see is the circle. Now, on this day, it was cloudy. The ceiling height was at about 1,900 feet. What everyone on the ground saw was the object suddenly move upwards through the clouds at a rapid rate of speed, and it went up for several thousand feet. And the interesting thing is that the object basically burned a hole through the clouds.
You mentioned directly from above. Does that mean someone in the air was able to witness this?
Yes, there was a witness who I've talked to who was in the air who witnessed it. Remember, this happened in 2006. Well, this guy reported it to me 6 years later, right? So my first thought is, okay, maybe this guy just makes it up, right? And he's heard the news and he just wants to be a part of the story. So I asked him if he has any evidence that he was there. And he said, yes, it struck him so strongly he kept his flight tickets the entire time. So I look at it, and I was able to verify the guy was telling me the truth.
You've got me on tenterhooks here.
His plane's coming in for landing, and he sees this gray circular object below the airplane. And as the airplane's continuing on its approach, he sees it at the same level instead of above him. And the object he can clearly see now is a disc. He describes it just like the ground crew, a gray colored object that's in a disc shape. There are no windows, there are no markings at all. It's just a solid piece of metal, or what appears to be metal. Now the plane lands. You can see the object again. It's stationary. Now this was really interesting. He said it basically did this. If you take a penny that's just sitting still and you drop it, it accelerates at a certain rate as it hits the ground. Well, he said it's just like you did that with this saucer-shaped object, except it went straight up. And he said it was just sudden. He also noted that it burned a hole through the clouds. So I thought that was an excellent piece of corroborating data.
What do you think to the explanation that others within the scientific community have given?
The main explanation that was given by the government was this was just an unusual weather phenomenon. I've never heard of a weather phenomenon that sits still for minutes and then suddenly punches a hole through a cloud, especially a deep cloud base like this one.
Sarah's a lot younger than me, and she talks about 2006 like it's ancient history. Okay.
I'm sorry.
I can assure her that in 2006, people had digital cameras. You must be really frustrated that this major event has happened. All these people have seen it happen, and yet no one's got a shot of it.
You're right, Craig. Surely someone could have taken a photograph of it, especially if it sat there for several minutes. To this date, no one has been able to produce either a video or a photograph of what happened that day.
What you're telling us is really interesting, but also really frustrating at the same time.
Completely. And one of the most unusual events to have happened on Earth, I'd say.
It is. It's a very unusual event.
What about the person in the plane? Do you think he saw a flying saucer?
Well, I believe that he saw a disc-shaped object, which some people call flying saucers. The most unusual part about this was that the object basically burned a hole through the clouds. We don't have the capability for an object to hover, which this object clearly did, and to suddenly accelerate and break through that cloud base within 1 to 2 seconds, and to vaporize the cloud base as it moves through it. I think it's just a case of you either believe these witnesses or you don't.
I'm not sure I'm happy with you.
Why not?
Robert has just said this is a virtually impossible case.
It's so frustrating, actually, isn't it? Because this is one of the most compelling, unexplained sightings, and yet we're limited by the evidence we've got. It's something so extraordinary.
But we have got audio in real time.
Yep.
Of it actually happening. I'm thinking about where we can go with this, and this is a massive international airport. Surely there will have been an investigation about this.
Let's find out.
Coming up.
They don't want to use that word UFO. They know that a disc can only mean one thing.
We find out how aviation bosses dealt with the flying saucer incident at Chicago O'Hare in November 2006. Surely it's incumbent on the FAA to investigate what is a major security breach at one of the busiest airports in the world. In November 2006, something extraordinary happened in the sky above Chicago O'Hare International Airport. A saucer-shaped UFO appeared to hover over gate C-17 for at least 5 minutes before shooting upward, punching a circular-shaped hole in the clouds.
There was a disc out there flying around.
There was a what?
A disc.
A disc? A disc? Like a frisbee?
Like a UFO type thing.
Bewildered United Airlines staff Witnessing the appearance of a round flying object above one of the world's busiest aviation facilities is surely cause for concern. But did the airline and the American Government Aviation Authority, the FAA, ever investigate? With more audio evidence to comb through, we're on a mission to get to the truth about this remarkable disc sighting.
Tower Care, this is Dave.
Some of our pilots on the ground were reporting a UFO sighting at 1,000 feet from the seaside of the airport. Did you guys hear anything about that?
You know what, the ramp tower called me, I want to say about 10, 15 minutes ago. We have not seen anything up there.
Okay.
I mean, if we do, hold on.
Gateway 5668?
5668, go ahead.
Yeah, look out your window. Do you see anything above United's concourse? They actually, believe it or not, they called us and said somebody observed a flying disc about 1,000 feet above the gate Charlie 17. You see anything over there?
Not that I can tell.
Okay. Yeah, I thought my job was stressful.
We saw it a half hour ago.
Who saw it?
A whole bunch of us over at the Charlie concourse.
Really? You guys did? Who's this?
The United taxi mechanics. Thought it was a balloon, but we're not sure.
That was spooky, wasn't it?
That's really spooky, and it's in real time as well. And what's strange is you've got pilots on the ground reporting seeing a flying disc flying at about 1,000 feet. The pilot in the air didn't see it, but the pilot on the ground did. But when you're talking pilots, it kind of raises the ante. It kind of says this is more believable.
That's multiple witnesses questioning it. These are people who spend their life in the skies. They're used to seeing all different types of weather. They're used to seeing different types of aircraft. They're not the sort of person who's going to make up seeing an unexplained object.
But they must have made a report. This must have gone through official channels. If they did make an official report, why has it been suppressed? Because surely someone is keeping the lid on this.
That's what doesn't make sense to me. But someone who might be able to help more with this is a guy called Ted Rose. So he's from an organisation called NARCAP in the US, which is essentially a place where pilots can report unusual sightings.
What I wanted to do was talk about what happened in Chicago.
We did an intensive study on it and resolved that something unusual had occurred over the airport and had affected safety factors at one of the most busiest airports in the world.
What we're struggling with, we've got the audio, multiple sightings from the ground, but no video, no photographs. Why is this?
Well, it's a good question. According to one of the ramp controllers who offered her report to the control tower, she mentioned that one of the ground crew had photographed this UFO.
I told Dave there was a disc flying outside above Charlie 17, and he thought I was pretty much high. But I'm not high and I'm not drinking.
Yeah.
Someone actually has a picture of it, so if you guys see it out there.
A disc? Like a frisbee?
Like a UFO type thing. Yeah, okay. Okay? Yeah. You have a picture of it.
However, we haven't seen that photograph. What we have is professionals who are on the job making factual reports and trying not to sound like idiots while they were doing it. The conversations between the ramp controller and the tower staff, you know, they're all nervous.
Somebody reported a UFO or a flying disc above Charlie concourse, seriously.
Excellent.
Yeah. So nobody can see it, but use caution.
All right.
And that's pretty much it.
They don't want to use that word UFO. They know that a disc can only mean one thing. They know that there are ground crew that stood there and watched it, and air crew that were moving aircraft around the facility that saw it. I'm not going to say that those 15 witnesses are lying.
Do you think that people did hand in videos, they did hand in photographic evidence, but someone's kept a lid on it?
It's possible. It's entirely possible that we have institutional bias in the aviation community. This incident involved United staff, and they weren't terribly forthcoming in helping us with investigations.
United denied they did an investigation, and then you later found out that they did.
Yeah, there was an internal investigation by United, but that was never made public. And I don't know how far it went, other than probably just shutting their folks up.
So there was a secret investigation into what happened in Chicago?
Yes.
But there was no investigation by the FAA into this incident. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. As far as we know, the FAA did not look at this. Pilots are instructed not to report UFOs to the FAA, and that goes for air traffic controllers and, of course, aviation professionals. The FAA does not take UFO reports.
Sorry, Ted, but surely it's incumbent on the FAA to investigate what is a major security breach. As you said, one of the busiest airports in the world.
I can't find a good reason why the FAA won't take UFO reports. Many of these cases are reported by pilots, and they do include safety factors. But if you use the terminology of UFO, they won't engage.
That's interesting. So let me get this straight. The FAA doesn't investigate UAPs or UFOs, even when they're reported by pilots.
Yes, that's exactly right. Pilot reporters are advised to contact outside organizations like my own.
How numerous are these reports, Ted?
Well, we don't get the majority of them. We get 2-3 reports a month.
Do you think there's a stigma attached to reporting UFOs? Is that the reason?
Well, yes. You have to be careful about what you talk about with who's in the seat next to you. If you're a pilot and you talk about it, you could end up with a psyche valve and lose your flight status.
Well, there you go. I mean, this is becoming quite intriguing. I mean, pilots are scared to report these things in case they lose their jobs. The FAA won't investigate it. They're telling pilots not to report this phenomenon.
That, to me, was the most curious thing. Did the FAA investigate it? Do we just not know yet? And I don't know whether we'll ever be able to find that out. But the fact that United had an investigation, but they denied it, and as you say, the stigma towards pilots.
15 people phoned this in. I'm not going on the mass hysteria line. I don't buy that at all. Why has no one taken a picture of it? Unless they did, and it's been suppressed, and it's looking like it might have been.
But we don't know.
Coming up.
It's really frustrating because this is a huge mystery.
As we continue to search for answers for what happened in Chicago in November 2006, we delve deeper into whether flying saucers are science fiction or science fact.
That clip is probably the most convincing bit of footage I've seen so far in this investigation.
Classic flying saucers haven't gone away.
Do you think the government's hiding things?
Oh, governments are always hiding things.
Oh my gosh, dude. Wow, look at the fly.
Since 2014, there's been regular UFO sightings reported by the military.
They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west.
In response to this, in April 2019, the US Navy took the unprecedented decision to implement official guidelines for pilots who witnessed such encounters. And in August 2020, the Department of Defense established a new task force to investigate them. It was a sign that where the military is concerned, the US government was taking UFO sightings more seriously as a potential safety threat. And even more so after the US presidential election of November 2020 and the incoming administration of America's 46th president, Joe Biden.
Certainly the safety of our personnel, security of our operations, our airspace are of paramount concern, whether that is identified or unidentified aircraft.
In stark contrast, we've discovered that in November 2006, no such consideration was shown to aviation personnel after one of the most remarkable flying saucer encounters to date took place.
15 years ago, an astonishing mass UFO sighting stunned America and the world when a metallic craft hovered over Chicago O'Hare International Airport. Multiple eyewitness accounts were captured on radio as they reported what they'd seen up the chain of airport command.
Somebody reported a UFO or a flying disc above Charlie Concourse, seriously.
There was no reason for them to lie or falsify their sightings, each report confirming the other.
We saw it a half hour ago.
Who saw it?
A whole bunch of us over at the Charlie Concourse.
But despite these jaw-dropping accounts, aviation authorities declined to officially investigate.
Something extraordinary was seen that day, and whatever it was, the object was shaped like a saucer or a disc. A disc-shaped saucer. It's just so science fiction. Do people see flying saucers because that's what B-movie directors in the 50s decided, well, that's what spaceships look like, or do they actually exist?
Well, it's kind of a bit of both. So the first actual claimed sighting of a flying saucer was in 1947. This guy called Kenneth Arnold, who was a pilot, he was flying his aeroplane near Mount Rainier in Washington State, and he saw an unusual object in the sky. He described it as skipping like a saucer. But when the press got hold of that interview, they then coined the term flying saucer. But in the natural world, there's also clouds, like this, that appear naturally, which look like flying saucers. They're both something from science fiction, but also something that occurs on Earth. So if you look at this video here, it does look like a flying saucer, and it's easy to understand why someone might mistake it as one, but it's actually known as a lenticular cloud. So you've got moist air, then dry air, then moist air, and when you get either mountains or tall buildings, that creates a disturbance in the air. Rising air cools and condenses. That creates these clouds, which are shaped like flying saucers, but are actually just clouds.
And how often are these clouds flying in Chicago?
Well, that's an interesting question because you've got a lot of tall buildings in Chicago, so that will cause that turbulence, which will allow the clouds to form. However, there aren't any mountains and there aren't very tall buildings near the airport. So it's unlikely, based on the description, the grey-like description as well, and the low level of it, that this was actually a lenticular cloud.
Okay, so what was it? How close are we to finding out?
Well, we're still not close. This is the issue. We've got the audio recording, and that's it. It's really frustrating because this is a huge mystery. There's lots of other cases like this with these flying saucer type objects in the sky, and I spoke to Nick Pope, who's a former MOD investigator and a UFO expert, about 2 other cases. Nick, we still hear a lot about these classical flying saucer sightings. Among one of the most recent ones is in September 2020 of this flying saucer-shaped object. Can you just talk us through whether it's significant or not?
Well, I think that UFOs, people still have in their mind's eye this image of the archetypal flying saucer, the disc-shaped craft. And even though in more modern times we hear more about triangular-shaped UFOs, the so-called tic-tacs, classic flying saucers haven't gone away. And so there are these sightings and continue to be all around the world. I've seen a picture from Yorkshire, which I'm afraid is just a cloud.
Do you think sometimes people see this disc-shaped thing, and even though we know it's a cloud, they want to believe it's something more?
Yes, it's absolutely, as the old saying from the X-Files goes, I want to believe. And why not? Sometimes people's will to believe affects their critical faculties, and they see something that just happens to look disc-shaped, and they think it must be a disc.
Now, one particular interesting incident, and this was again another flying saucer type object, was in Sweden in 2012. Can you just talk us through what was filmed?
Well, these 2 people were out. One was driving one of these all-terrain vehicles, and the other witness was being sort of pulled behind on a sled and saw this strange object in the sky.
Halina, take off!
He shouted to try and alert, I think it was his sister driving the ATV, and then he said that the shouting seemed to disturb the UFO, which flew off.
Halina, take off!
It's intriguing, I'll have to say. It's an odd one.
Halina, take off!
We've got video evidence, but we haven't yet got the resources to actually analyse and find out exactly what this is?
I mean, frankly, this is why governments all around the world need to have active UFO programs, because sometimes it's only the government that has the resources and the capabilities to do these proper contemporaneous investigations, which the civilian community doesn't.
Does that not worry you?
It always worries me that things like this go uninvestigated. I mean, that's the most frustrating thing of all, is that we have got the tools to do this. I think the problem is that most governments embed UFO programs in the military and in the Ministry of Defense and in the intelligence community. And so you're dealing with these inherently secretive organizations whose default mindset is not to share this information.
Do you think the government's hiding things?
Oh, governments are always hiding things. Now, whether they're actually sitting on an extraterrestrial smoking gun or not, I don't know. Not the British government, so far as I'm aware. I will tell you, we did not have one of these things hidden away at a secret military base.
But Nick, would you be able to tell me if you did know?
Probably not. I'd probably give you a no comment on that, but I'm not giving you a no comment, I'm giving you a no, we genuinely didn't have one.
But surely if you knew, if you knew you weren't able to tell us, you'd just say no.
I know people find this difficult to believe, but governments really don't like to lie. They sometimes don't tell the full story. But if you have a spaceship hidden away in a hangar somewhere, and you're asked about it, you probably won't say no if the answer is yes.
Are you able to tell us the full story about what's going on?
Yes, certainly I think in the UK. What I don't know is whether other governments, particularly the United States, know a little bit more.
That clip in Sweden is probably the most convincing bit of footage I've seen so far in this investigation. There was a bit where it glinted as it flew past. You could see that it was metallic. I mean, if that's what they had in Chicago.
I don't think we can say they're related. It's certainly an interesting video, as you say, but because we haven't got any videos of what happened in Chicago, we can't even compare the two. In terms of lenticular clouds, I don't think it's them. It doesn't match the conditions, but I still believe there's a natural explanation for what happened in Chicago. It's just a rare explanation.
Okay, we'll bring it on.
Coming up,
we're seeing things in the sky that humans have never had a chance to see before.
We find out once and for all if natural science can explain the infamous Chicago O'Hare disk sighting.
I would love to believe that this was a UFO, but I don't think the evidence suggests that.
What does it suggest then? Aviation authorities were tight-lipped after a major mass sighting in 2006 of a silent metallic UFO hovering above Chicago O'Hare Airport.
Sub left, clear to land, United 615. Say 28 position hold, United 881 heavy.
But a Freedom of Information request uncovered an audio recording of witnesses reporting the UFO to the control tower.
You're seeing flying discs.
Well, I think the pilot and the ramp guys are telling us the C-17, they saw some flying disc above it. We can't see it.
Come on, Sue.
Yet despite this hard evidence, the Aviation Authority declared the event was a weather phenomenon.
We're leaving no stone unturned to find out if the sighting of the disc-shaped object in Chicago in November 2006 does have a natural explanation, or whether only an extraterrestrial one fits the bill.
Okay, Sarah, let's look at what we've got. We've got an audio recording of multiple witnesses saying that they see a flying disc above C-17 in O'Hare Airport in Chicago.
I think it's just a case of you either believe these witnesses or you don't.
What about the person in the plane? Do you think he saw a flying saucer?
I believe that he saw a disc-shaped object, which some people call flying saucers. The most unusual part about this was that the object basically burned a hole through the clouds.
We've got no video recording of that. The FAA have just closed down all communication.
Pilots are instructed not to report UFOs to the FAA, and that goes for air traffic controllers and, of course, aviation professionals. The FAA does not take UFO reports.
You've got people saying that it could be A weather phenomenon. Is it a weather phenomenon?
I think weather's certainly interesting, but the fact you've got multiple witnesses, credible witnesses on the ground, people who are used to seeing unusual weather, and they've phoned it in, that to me is really intriguing. But I think there's still a natural explanation to this.
Okay.
So I've got someone who believes they can explain what happened at Chicago O'Hare Airport. His name is Dr. Mark Hammergren, and he's an astronomer.
Listen, I so want to believe that this sighting at O'Hare Airport is a UFO. Are you going to put a pin in my weather balloon?
I would love to believe that this is a UFO, specifically an alien craft, but I don't think the evidence suggests that.
What does it suggest then?
Well, listening to the details of the reports, they saw a round, circular object hanging just below a uniform cloud deck, and then they turned and went back to work, and when they looked back, they saw there was no object. It supposedly disappeared. It left this hole punched in the clouds. Now that phrase right there suggested something that's called a hole punch cloud. This is a phenomenon that happens at that time of year with those kinds of clouds and is caused usually by aircraft passing through a cloud deck. It's at a very busy airport. So this could have been a hole punch cloud that they saw.
We've got pilots on the ground. They're used to seeing unusual weather, and you'd think they'd be used to seeing a hole punch cloud. Why do you think they didn't recognize this as a weather phenomena?
Well, I'm not certain what it was that they really did see. We just have to go on the basis of these reports.
Do we know much about the weather conditions on the day of this sighting then? Because you need specific conditions for these hole punch clouds to form.
We know that the weather conditions, that the temperatures and the cloud structures were perfect. But moreover, I decided I would look for some satellite imagery of that area around that time. Earlier in the day, you can see the Midwestern United States. And in the clouds, you can see some hole punch clouds. So the conditions were perfect, and they were occurring elsewhere in the Midwest at the time.
It would certainly explain why the pilot in the air couldn't see it, and the fact that there was no video or photographic footage of it.
That's right, and that's something, as a Chicago native myself, I find very curious. O'Hare Airport is not out in the middle of nowhere. It's very close to the city, surrounded by suburbs, major highways going past it. If there was something clearly recognizable as a strange object in the sky, other people would have seen it. Somebody would have photographed it or videoed it.
You've got a background in astrobiology. Can you just explain to us more about the concept that we're not alone?
As our knowledge of space has grown and our own Earth has grown, we realize that life can exist in conditions that would be prevalent everywhere throughout the universe. So the chances of life of some kind existing out there are very, very high. You know, also for a long time, well, we've wanted to believe that we are not alone as an intelligent species. But as scientists, we really need to have evidence. We can't just believe what we want to believe.
You're ruling out the possibility that this was an unexplained craft. You're saying this was definitely weather, but there's some sightings that we cannot explain. Do you agree with that?
Oh, I absolutely agree with that, but we have to admit that, well, we know for a fact that people lie sometimes for no reason.
We also have to accept the fact that this was a mass sighting, and I don't think it was a mass hoax, and the people in Chicago actually believed what they were seeing.
That I would absolutely agree with. You have several independent witnesses. They saw something, but what they saw is open to interpretation.
So, Sarah, Dr. Mark Hammergren gives a really convincing argument that it is a weather phenomenon.
What he gives is a very valid scientific explanation for what happened, that it was something to do with the weather. You know, this hole punch cloud, you get this super cold water in the air, and then when an aeroplane actually takes off, that causes that water to freeze as it goes over the wings, and you get this hole punched in the clouds, literally a hole punch, and it gives you that shape, that disc shape, which all the witnesses have described. However, I'm still curious. Pilots and airport workers must have seen those types of clouds before.
We've pored over every scrap of evidence we can get our hands on relating to the disc-shaped apparition which appeared over Chicago O'Hare on November 7th, 2006. But where does the truth lie? In a scientific, meteorological explanation? Or in the compelling audio reports of the credible witnesses who were there?
Before we jump to any conclusions, let's review all the evidence that we've got. Let's start with the audio.
Tower Cab, this is Dave.
Some of our employees, I don't know if you heard anything about this, some of our pilots on the ground were reporting a UFO sighting at 1,000 feet from the seaside of the airport. Did you guys hear anything about that?
You know what, the ramp tower called me, I want to say about 10, 15 minutes ago. We have not seen anything up there.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, look out your window. Do you see anything above United Tankers? They actually, believe it or not, they called us and said somebody observed a flying disc about 1,000 feet above the gate Charlie 17. You see anything over there?
Not that I can tell.
Okay. Yeah, I thought my job was stressful.
We saw it a half hour ago.
Who saw it?
A whole bunch of us over at the Charlie Concourse.
People were convinced that they'd seen a flying disc.
Robert Powell talked about the fact that this couldn't be explained. A witness that he'd spoken to who was a passenger on an international flight, that's the only witness we've got. No pilots saw this alleged object from above. I still don't quite understand why none of the people in the audio recording have ever spoke about it since.
I mean, they're too scared to come up and say, I saw a UFO, in case people laugh at them and denigrate them. The FAA won't investigate it. Of course, Ted Rowe talks about a lot of pilots reporting very unusual things in the air. He also talked about their reluctance to report them.
Well, you can understand the stigma. At the same time, we've only been flying for, 100 years? I mean, we're seeing things in the sky that humans have never had a chance to see before. Most of those will probably have a natural explanation.
The first time you listen to the audio from the control tower, it's really enigmatic, it's really convincing. It draws you in and makes you believe. Having spoken to Dr. Mark Hammergren, I'm less convinced. I really want to believe, but with all the evidence that we've got, it doesn't really add up to much. There's no videos, there's no photos. What about you?
Obviously, we've got to bear in mind, he wasn't there, but he has got the satellite imagery, which shows there are other hole punch clouds. He's offered us a reasonable scientific explanation, which no one else has been able to do.
Okay, so what side of the fence are you?
Case unproven.
Case unproven.
The persuasive explanation behind the sighting of a flying saucer above Chicago O'Hare Airport in November 2006 is that it truly was a phenomenon.
We saw it a half hour ago.
Only we've concluded it was a phenomenon of the natural kind. Perhaps if more witnesses had felt able to come forward and the government had investigated the incident, we'd have reached a different outcome. But there's no denying a disc-shaped object suddenly appearing anywhere, let alone in the sky above an airport, would make anybody shudder.